Starting with the second panel with a little delay, and we're going to make up that time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you very much for our second panel of the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum, the Middle East in Disarray. Originally, the title was A New Regional Order in the Middle East. But in view of the great disruptions in Syria and Iraq, in view of the difficult situation in Libya and Egypt, it is difficult to speak of a new regional order. In German, you would better speak of a new regional disorder. This is what we want to discuss today. I'm very happy indeed to bring together an excellent panel on this subject. I would like to welcome very much the Foreign and Security Policy Consultant of Federal Chancellor Merkel, Christoph Heusgen, the former Lebanese Premier Najib Mikati, the President of the Iranian National Center of Globalization Studies with the Iranian President, Alireza Moayeri, that's right, and the chairman of the Gulf Research Center in Jeddah, Abdulaziz. So the panel is being facilitated by the journalist and author Souad Mekhennet. Souad, over to you. You have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this discussion. First, let me give you a little overview how we're going to do this. As agreed with our panelists, I will do a first round asking 1 to 2 questions, and they promised to answer them in about approximately 4 minutes. And then the second round, I would also like to invite you already, if you have certain questions to ask, raise your hand. We will do a little back and forth in a discussion between these gentlemen. So we would like to have this, to have a lively, welcoming, including discussion here. Dr. Heusgen, actually, Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier just said that he was feeling that he had missed certain opportunities when it came to conflicts in the Middle East, and especially he spoke about Syria, and he mentioned there had been opportunities where he thought the policy should have been more including towards Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian regime. So I'm wondering, do you think maybe there is a possibility or opportunity now to include the Syrian regime? Basically, are you talking to Bashar al-Assad these days?
I think that, of course, in history, when you see crises like the present one, you always ask yourself, have you missed chances? And certainly, the mistakes were committed, but it's too late now. We are where we are, so we have to see what can be done at the present stage. I think the fact that maybe now there is an organization, ISIS, that with regard to humanitarian, human rights violations is even worse than Assad. We shouldn't consider Assad now somebody who is all of a sudden an interlocutor and somebody we should work with. I think that we must not forget that it's Assad who is to blame for thousands and hundred thousands of people who have been killed, for millions of people who are displaced within and outside the country. So we have to take that into consideration and not consider him somebody who is constructive. What we need is to solve the crisis is a political solution. I don't think that we will be able to resolve it in military means. Military means may be necessary, and even the UN Secretary General said that at a certain moment these airstrikes were necessary, but we have to seek a political solution where we have to have the main players in the region sitting around the table. And we have Iran here, we have Saudi Arabia in the region. There has to be a political solution to it, and then there may be, to answer your question, then there may be somebody who then is ready to also talk to the Iraqis, to Assad. I see the Russian ambassador here, and Russia has excellent relations to Assad, providing him with weapons, and I think there is somebody who could talk to him and tell him to come to his senses.
So the German government is not talking to Bashar al-Assad these days?
I don't see that we would speak to Assad. No.
Okay. Prime Minister, your country is one of the neighboring countries to Syria, and again, the German foreign minister mentioned that there were a lot of conferences where they debated how to support Lebanon and Jordan, because you're facing also a lot of challenges with all these refugees. And now the winter is coming, and even the winter in the Middle East is very hard and cold. Are you actually happy with what you received from the international community? Is that enough?
Are really very disappointed about the international community. We, in 2012, I had meeting when I were Prime Minister. I had meeting with all foreign and Prime Ministers of United States, European, and all they promised that please accept for humanitarian purposes, accept the refugees in Lebanon. And at that time were only 12, I remember September 2011, were 12,000 refugees. And all of a sudden we accepted and we took for granted the promises, and we received so far over 1 million, and all the promises vaporized. And really we are, you take into consideration Lebanon has 4 million population, and we have 25% overnight an increase in our population, and we are facing a lot of problem in all aspects, in competition, in labor forces, and the infrastructure, and such huge demand in everything. So what we call, and thanks for Germany that they host a conference 2 weeks ago, but in fact we are not seeing anything concrete so far.
So far, nothing on the ground.
Nothing concrete.
Okay, and let me lead. This brings us to another, as you both mentioned, also a player in the region, Iran. Ambassador Moayeri, Your Excellency, I was recently actually with the Körber Foundation in Iran, in Tehran, and when it came to the Syria conflict and the discussion about ISIS and Iraq, the situation in Iraq, the authorities there spoke about Iran fighting also the war on terror. Could you tell us a little bit more about what exactly you mean about that? What kind of terrorism are you fighting, and that you're in the same boat with the West?
As you know, before the ISIS started the attack in Syria and also in Iraq, it was Iran, the first country that they mentioned, especially our president, about the threat of ISIS. And we are against the terrorism and extremism. And our president last year in the United Nations mentioned a proposal as WAVE, Word Against Terrorism and Extremism. And we are working about it, and it has been approved by the General Assembly in the United Nations. As you know, ISIS, unfortunately in Iraq, they are earning $1 million per day. That's the a study from the Secretary General and also from the Mr. David Cohen in the United States. Every day, $1 million by selling oil in the black market. I think the first thing that we have to do with the cooperation in the regional and trans-regional countries is to prevent the funding and assistance with the terrorism, the ISIS, to fund the dollars and also the funding problem. And the second is to help Iraqi government to fight against ISIS and terrorism. Nobody can do it except Iraqi. We have to help Iraqi's armies, as Iran did it before, as the sending the tools and also some advice, army advice, and also something like this. Not Western countries, not European, cannot go through the ground battle in Iraq or in Syria.
Okay. Which leads us to Abdulaziz Zagar. We just heard about fighting terrorism and ISIS. Saudi Arabia and some other countries in the region are part of the coalition. So do you find yourself in the same boat with Iran out of a sudden?
Well, let me start by saying the invasion of Soviet Union to Afghanistan have brought Al-Qaeda, the unfinished job of United States of America in Iraq, and the opening the gate for Iran to take over Iraq have brought the ISIS. ISIS was not created today. 2003, Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi disintegrated himself from Al-Qaeda and create what we call al-Tawheed wal-Jihad. In 2006, the state of Iraq, the Islamic State of Iraq was created. So it's not today, it's a result of many unfinished jobs. What His Royal Highness Prince Saud al-Faisal in 2004 have wished in the Bahrain Manama dialogue, he said we need to have a friendly Iran, a safe Iraq, and a prosperous Yemen. Unfortunately, 10 years after, we don't have that. And what our friends from Iran claiming to support fighting terrorism, they have to start with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been identified in the European and in the American side as a terrorist group. So we have to start from there, allowing Hezbollah to interfere in Syria issue and to participate in helping a brutal dictator who have killed more than 250,000 people, yet 6 million Syrians living outside Syria with all the mass damages that have been created, and yet support him. And you don't call that supporting terrorism? I think we need to revisit the whole issue of how Iran policy in the region. What we are suffering from in Iran in the region is the interventionist policies using the sectarian dimension as a mean of interfering in Bahrain, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and lately in Yemen. So all of that is what we call the interventionist policy. Yet it's supported by another country, unfortunately, which is Russia. Russia support and endorse all that policy, created such a situation. Again, look at yesterday. We were all hoping for the last, what they call al-fursa al-akhira, the last chance, in the negotiation in Oman. What happened? They walked out with unfinished deal. What are we going to have now in the region? We were hoping for an excellent deal. It's not going to happen. We were going to hope for a good deal. I'm not so sure 24th of November is going to bring a good deal. We may gonna walk out with the bad deal. Bad deal, which means we'll leave a room for Iran to maneuver, to revisit the issue in different way.
Thank you very much. You set the stage with the... Yes, please go ahead, Prime Minister.
A small, very short footnote.
Please go ahead.
Is that whenever we call ISIS or Islamic State has nothing to do with Islam itself. Just here we are 3 out of 4, and we are Muslim, and we believe that the Islamic State have nothing to do with tolerance, nothing to do with a peaceful religion like Islamic religion.
But yet there seem to be some misunderstandings or different, let's say, opinions what terrorism is, and actually, which is leading me back to you, Your Excellency Moayeri. Hezbollah was mentioned. You just said in your previous entry comment that
and
Iran is committed,
the Iraqi militia also.
and that Iran is committed to fight terrorism, and there are many people here in this room. In their countries, actually, groups like Hezbollah are seen as a terrorist organization. They are on the list. How are you dealing with these issues?
In our definition, Hezbollah is not a terrorist group. They are fighting against their territory to liberate it in the Lebanon, and they are not terrorist group. And the second, that it's very clearly, Mr. Prime Minister mentioned, that the ISIS is neither a Islamic nor an state, and they are not representative the real Islam. So we cannot call them as a representative of Islam.
Herr Dr. Heusgen, actually Russia was also just mentioned. We will get back to the discussion of Islam and Shia-Sunni war, possible war, but I know that Dr. Heusgen has to leave earlier, so I would like to ask you, Russia was mentioned actually, and if we look at the outcome of the so-called Arab Spring in Syria, in also Libya, it seemed the Russian actually got it right, and the West got it wrong. Would you disagree with that?
Well, we haven't seen the end of history there in the different countries. I would like to turn the direction to another case where I think we are much more hopeful, and this is Tunisia. And I think when we look at Tunisia, we have seen a positive development. We have seen something that also with regard to Russia is important. What did we see in Tunisia? We saw Arab Spring come up there, and then at that time the Arab countries were ready to do something about it. And it was Saudi Arabia that was ready to give Ben Ali an opportunity to leave the country. And this was in early stage of the conflict, and Ben Ali left, and we have the discussions, we have Ennahda, we have other parties, and they have their differences. But if let alone, I think that Tunisia can be, and I'm optimistic, will be a showcase of Arab Spring. Now, if we translate that to Syria, when we look back at the early stages of the Syrian conflict, again, there was a situation where the international community said Assad is no longer bearable because of what he has done. And then the question was, and you mentioned Russia, the question was squarely put to our Russian partners, are you ready to do the same thing as Saudi Arabia did with Ben Ali? Russia is the one country that supports Syria most, is providing weapons to Assad, and without Russia, Assad cannot survive. So why not then, why couldn't have the Russians, and we asked them formally, do the same thing as Saudi Arabia did with Ben Ali? Take Assad early on, allow for the multi-ethnic, multi-religious Syria to sustain with this way. I think there were 2 years ago possibilities that the different religions in Syria could have worked together. Today, we are in a much worse stage. So I don't think that the Russian claims see what has happened and we are right. I think it's the other way around. I think Russia could have been much more constructive in this case.
Prime Minister, Hezbollah was mentioned several times in this discussion as well. You are from Lebanon, you're dealing with Hezbollah, and some people actually say that maybe ISIS would not have been as strong or getting as much support from the Sunni tribes if Hezbollah would not have been involved in the Syria conflict at the beginning. What's your opinion on that?
As Mr. Sakhr mentioned, that ISIS, it's an outcome of different phases in the Middle East in the last decades, last few decades, in fact. If we look, if we'd like to talk about the ISIS, we have to see to know the raison d'être and possible outcome of the ISIS. ISIS, is it an outcome of internal forces? Is it an outcome of external forces? Is it an outcome of the result of collapse of regimes in the Middle East? Plus, we can say it is an outcome of sectarianism today in the Middle East. I mean, the dispute between Shia and Sunni. Yes, it could be one of the reasons today. Plus other reason, and the most important, is lack of growth, lack of education. Let's say this Down syndrome of the Arab population about the Palestinian-Israeli situation, and we will not get to any place. We are not getting to any peaceful situation in this file, in this aspect.
But let's get back to the question: is Hezbollah an issue? Is Hezbollah also part of the problem, from your perspective?
For us in Lebanon, as you know, we are divided into two opinions. One, they believe that Hezbollah is really a resisting movement, and they are defending Lebanon, especially in the south of Lebanon, and they are stopping any invasion of the Israeli in Lebanon. And that's one. And the second opinion, they believe that Hezbollah should withdraw from Syria and not interfering in Syria.
And what do you think?
Myself, I can say, I'm saying this loudly, they are a resisting movement. They are really defending the south of Lebanon, but at the same time, as my policy, we should to dissociate from what's going on in Syria. They should withdraw from Syria.
So,
well,
Dr. Zagar?
That gives a very significant role for the non-state actors. And unfortunately, what we are witnessing today in the region, a non-state actors taking the lead, doing what government's supposed to do. A weak Lebanese government have given the reason for Hezbollah to rise and to do what they are doing today. But I think we accepted this until certain time. Today, the Lebanese army are in control of south of Lebanon. There is a recognition of the border between Israel and Lebanon. There is a ceasefire that's being stopped there. So why don't we have the role of the state? Why not the Lebanese army, take their role, present it and do it? What happened that Hezbollah militia went to Syria to fight, to support, to keep Assad in position, using the Iranian expert in the military, so-called, and intelligence, to help him to stay in power, to bombard the innocent people by using all these barrels through the helicopter. And again, we have the problem of the American veto in supplying the adequate weapon system to the real good Syrian rebels, to the Free Syrian Army, to have an anti-aircraft and anti-tank missiles that have allowed the intervention of Hezbollah to fight in the land of Syria. They're Lebanese, but they're fighting in Syria, supporting that regime. You stop it in one hand, you interfere, you put all the red line and all the red tape to allow the Free Syrian Army to have the adequate,
Dr. Zaghal, may I ask you, because you mentioned the Free Syrian Army, the so-called Free Syrian Army. I have 2.5 months ago interviewed a high-level ISIS commander at the Turkish-Syrian border region, and this person said, among other things, that some of the people who joined ISIS and some other groups had been trained by Western intelligence services and others, getting also weapons from Qatar and also Saudi Arabia at some stage. And they joined ISIS later. They had been part of the Free Syrian Army, but then they joined ISIS and other Islamist groups. Do you see, when you say now the Free Syrian Army, do you see also maybe a danger that when you are giving weapons away, and you mentioned also the Kurds, when you are doing that, that maybe one day this can turn against you, and that we have seen already actually signals?
All the non-state actors, once they become strong, because in the non-state actors, normally they have an ideology, they have an external relation, they do build their own independence economic situation, they build the network between themselves, and they rise in a weak state. Hezbollah was only created and rise in a weak state in Lebanon. So all these 5 elements are extremely important for the non-state actor, the way how they grew and they build up themselves. What we are going to see today, we're going still to see a more internal struggle within all these different groups. If the international community played its role from the beginning, maybe we would have not gone to that extremism fighting on the land of Lebanon. If the US have not played all this, what we call red line, when is the red line, how is the red line going to act, and if we have supported the Syrian from day one, first we understand there was no real Syrian opposition organized, so-called as a structure. They were trying to help and to create themselves. But because of that situation, the international community have not really done its duty and commitment to the civilian people and to this massacre.
Which is bringing us back to the role of Iran as well. Why did Iran decide to support Bashar al-Assad until this day? Also, why did Iran decide to support Hezbollah and other militias? They were also the Mahdi army and others entering Syria and participating in this war. I'm asking this also because on one hand, I'm hearing from Iranian officials that they don't want this to be a sectarian war, but on the other hand, it does look like it.
Unfortunately, the situation in Syria is a catastrophe situation, and we have to see this question, why this happened. Unfortunately, some of the Western countries and their alliance, they have a misunderstanding and misreading about the Arab Spring. And they came to Syria and to manipulate the situation. They bring a situation for terrorism and extremism to rise them in the Syria. If ISIS is a terrorist group in Iraq, it is also a terrorist group in Syria. We have not a definition, good terrorism and bad terrorism. They are both is bad terrorism. If we fight against ISIS in Syria, we fight it in Iraq. From the beginning, we support the Syrian nation because we saw that the case of Syria is not a case for democracy. It is just with the another things that they want to be there to manipulate the situation and also to fall on the government.
So basically, you are also making a difference between where the so-called Arab Spring happened. So you see Syria totally separate from the other countries?
No, I mean that they came by the misunderstanding as the Arab Spring. We have to learn from the past. When the Western countries supported Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan to resist and fight against the former Soviet Union, and then it became a problem for them to create 9/11. It's learning from the past. Why we support, I mean, some of the country in Syria with some extremist group, and they be a problem for them for in Iraq.
But, Excellency, due all respect, when we look a little bit now, taking what happened in Syria also into the region, and Dr. Zagar and also the Prime Minister mentioned to look a bit broader. For example, Bahrain, it's a country where there was an uprising in 2011. It's a country where there is a Shia-led opposition as well. But it's a country that is facing a lot of terrorism as well from some of these groups where there are Molotov cocktails thrown every day, where thousands of policemen have been injured. But I don't see Iran speaking up against that.
We don't interfere in Bahrain, and also we have a normal relation with Bahrain. And as you know, the majority people in Bahrain is the Shias.
I haven't seen
if you look, and also you can remember, during the Al-Qaeda's and the ISIS, you cannot find any Iranian nationality or any Shia. The Shia and also Iranian, they are moderate, Islamic moderate. They are not against the people, they are not against the interfering the countries. We have a normal countries, we are neighbors.
Dr. Zagar, you're
I think the question in Bahrain is quite adequate. I mean, we have seen many of Al-Wifaq leaders, the Bahraini opposition party, have been trained in Iran and received all the financial support from Iran. We have seen serious Iranian intervention in with the people directly. You look into the Iranian media, and there's almost 27 TV stations today moves within the circles of Iran, either supported or a friend of Iran or strong allies of Iran. You can look into those and you can see the mass media coming out of those ones in support of the Wifaq in Bahrain and the destabilization. When Saudi Arabia and the GCC forces interfere in Bahrain, that was upon the request of the Bahraini government. And Bahrain is part of the GCC structure. So that request came officially from the government, and none of them have sent one single bullet or even a single act against a Bahraini national. They went to protect critical facility like oil refinery and the aluminium smelter, electricity power plant. That was their job, is to try to help to maintain stability and security in Bahrain. The Bahraini government are the one who have dealt with the Bahraini people on the situation. So I don't believe Iran non-interventionist policy is true, because even if they want to cooperate and counter terrorism, they should start by delivering Al-Qaeda member in Iran. And they know, and we know very well, they promised the Saudi to deliver. We have had the Saudi official delegation went to Iran, hoping to receive those members. 10 days later, the C-130, the Saudi aircraft, came back empty with no terrorist group from Iran being delivered through that one. So they have to start by delivering what they have in Iran, and they know it. They have to start by really not supporting a sectarian government in Iraq that was the reason for the creation of the ISIS.
Okay.
Because of that isolation policy of the Sunni was the creation of such a terrorist group also there.
Before I open up the stage for questions, Dr. Heusgen, Prime Minister, would you like to react on, say something towards what you heard from your fellow?
Instead of enriching let's say, the sectarism between the Iranian and the Saudis, we have to look to the positive things. And today, all the messages, either from Saudi Arabia, from King Abdullah, and from President Rouhani, all they believe in dialogue and they believe in openness. In this situation, we will be a win-win situation. But if we enlarge the gap, so we will be more and more in lose situation. And today, before 24th of November, if we get this agreement between the P5+1 and the Iranian, and I believe we definitely will have a kind of a positive framework and outcome of this negotiation. And then it will be, the Saudi Arabia will be more involved. Hopefully we can get near to each other.
So you're trying to build a bridge now between
exactly.
parties. Dr. Heusgen.
Yes, let me, in the same vein, also try, when we see a bit the polarization left and right here, let's find a bridge. And I would like to echo the Prime Minister by pleading to both of you, actually, to try to make the new Iraq maybe a showcase of better cooperation. I think objectively, one has to say, at least I would claim objectively, that Iran committed a mistake by supporting the Maliki government to a degree which allowed Iraq to go too far into the direction of supporting only and caring only about the Shiite part of the population. And by neglecting the Sunni part, Maliki contributed to the rise of ISIS. And we now have an opportunity with the new Prime Minister. He has a new government, a new Speaker of Parliament. People in general, we have the impression, who are balanced, who see now the necessity for Iraq to have an inclusive government, to have an inclusive army. And I think there is something where I see a chance also for Saudi Arabia and Iran, who are perhaps the key players in the region, to maybe allow for Iraq to go into the direction that I described. As I said at the very beginning, there is no military solution to the problem. There can only be a political solution. And I think we need to have something, we need to build something as we did in Europe in the 70s with the CSCE, and have to have a situation where also the main players in the Arab world sit around the table.
So sitting around the table. We are not sitting around the table, but I see a lot of hands up. Please do us one favor, because I see a lot of hands up. Go straight to the question, introduce yourself, and go please straight to the question and say, tell us who you want to answer the question. Maybe the lady here at the beginning, and then I come to you, sir. So.
My name is Ibtisam Al-Kitbi from Emirates and from Emirates Policy Center. I just want to I have a comment and a question for Mr.
Short
Alireza.
comment and a straight question, yeah.
According to Iranian constitution, that it doesn't acknowledge or recognize the international system. So how you are going to participate in the war against terrorism with the international system? Now, the second question, how can Iran play a constructive role in fighting ISIS or terrorism while it's playing a destructive role in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and everywhere? So how can you do this?
Okay, I'll say let's do 3 questions and then we'll go back to the panel. The gentleman just here behind you.
Senator Mushaid Hussain from Pakistan. I must thank the Körber Foundation for having a very representative gathering. My question is in 2 components regarding the causes of the Middle East in disarray. One component is addressed to Dr. Heusgen, because this is probably, Dr. Heusgen, the first time after World War II that the United States has lost control, clout, and influence over events in the Middle East. And I think in large part because of the consequences of the wrong invasion and occupation of Iraq. What can the European Union do and take some initiatives on issues to knit the Middle East together, and also to focus on the Palestine issue? The second component of my question is addressed to my friend, Dr. Sagar, and my friend Alireza Moayeri, who are old friends of mine.
Lots of friends here.
Yes, of course. I won't say brothers yet. It'll take some time. I think in most of the Muslim world, people are very concerned that one major source of destabilization is what is seen as a proxy conflict between the 2 major players in the Muslim world, Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I think Dr. Sagar alluded to that with reference to Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Bahrain, and Yemen even, and the list is growing, and we are worried in Pakistan and Afghanistan that this virus might not spread. Until recently, there were chances of some rapprochement when Mr. Ahmadinejad went to 2012 to see King Abdullah, and recently Mr. Jawad Zarif was invited by Prince Saud Al Faisal. So what can be the basis of some rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia to diffuse this conflict, because this will destabilize not just the entire Muslim world, but also Iran and Saudi Arabia, because all Muslim communities are multi-ethnic and multi-sectarian. And this is a very dangerous, this is the single biggest threat to the unity, stability, and security of the Muslim
question,
countries.
please. Thank you very much. One more, maybe from the other side, and then we'll do the second round.
Thank you very much. Volker Pertes from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. I also have one question and one comment. The question is about, let us think about, a little bit positive about the future. Said Moayeri, if there is some form of agreement on the 24th of November, and I guess there will be some form of agreement, what do you think will change in Iran's domestic and foreign policy? I mean, the result of an agreement can not only be that you are officially allowed to enrich and some sanctions will be slashed. I think there should be further changes. What do you think the changes will be? My comment is to the entire panel, and it may not make me popular here. I'm very, very uneasy when I hear that ISIS, or the so-called Islamic State, has nothing to do with Islam. We are seeing these people, the so-called Khalifa and others, exploiting, using an extremist reading of Islam and of Islamic law, which is also popular in a couple of other countries, including Abdulaziz, your country, in Saudi Arabia. And if we in our history would have said, well, our religious wars in the 30 Years' War have nothing to do with Christianity, we would be lying. We couldn't blame Russia or America on the 30 Years' War, on the sectarian conflicts between Protestants and Catholics at the same time. So I think unless the most important ideological leaders of the Islamic world, which is Iran on one hand and Saudi Arabia on the others, unless you admit your responsibility for the sectarianism we're having in the Arab world and try to do something about it, we will still have ISIS around in a couple of years.
So let's take all these questions back to the panel, and I have also some questions from Twitter. Maybe we'll start with you, Excellency.
Question from my sister from Emirat. Two questions. The first one is that we cannot join the Western countries to war against terrorism because of our constructive legitimation and also our rule in Iran. But we are helping the Iraqi peoples and also Iraqi government, but sending the equipment and also the military advice. If Iran didn't help Iraq, we cannot see Erbil in the Kurdistan as a free city today. All Iraqi officials mentioned that without help of Iran, they cannot resist against ISIS, because the only legitimate body in the world is United Nations. If United Nations approved in the Security Council, we join it. Except it, we cannot join, but we are helping them. And your second question, we don't, as I said before, we don't interfere in the regional country. The stability in the region is our priority. We don't want a region, instability region. And the third question from my brother, Mr. Mushahid Sharif from Pakistan, is that we are not satisfied with the relation with Saudi Arabia. As you correctly mentioned, the Arabi-Saudi is one of the main important countries in the region. And we have to talk, we are doing our best to improve our bilateral relation. As you mentioned, Minister Zarif met with Minister Saud Al Faisal, and we are preparing a meeting for the further and also to expand and promote our bilateral relation. Because we thought that Iran and Saudi Arabia can play a constructive role in the region for stability in the region. We hope so in the near future we will do it. And the third question about the 24th November, about the negotiation 5+1. As you know, the negotiation is continuing today. It is the third day of negotiation in Oman, in Muscat. And I'm totally optimistic about this progress, and we think that we are in the level to reach an agreement and a deal together. We have to wait for the time. Thank you.
Let me also add one question coming from Twitter to you, and also just to make one thing clear. When we spoke about Bahrain, we also have to mention, of course, in 2011, we all know there had been human rights abuses and so on. And in that regard, you're getting a question from one tweeter who says, my question is to the Iranian, why don't you talk about the human rights abuses in Syria and only focus on Bahrain?
I think it's human rights. When we talk about it, because I was ambassador to United Nations in Geneva, and I was ambassador of Iran to the Human Rights Council also. I know very well about it. It is a double standard. And some countries, you talk about human rights, and some countries, you didn't talk about it. We believe about the human rights everywhere, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and also in Bahrain. But you have to see, when the Bahrainis people, who are the majorities, they are once wanting who are there and which country supported and which country is against them.
So it is a sectarian issue. You're saying it is a sectarian issue.
The double standard is the main problem for us, I think, in the countries.
So is it a sectarian issue? Also, it's going towards the direction of what Dr. Pertes asked, the second part, it seems to be a sectarian issue in the way you see conflicts, in the way you paint human rights abuses. Yes and no, there are human rights abuses.
You mean it's the relation related with the 5+1 negotiation?
No, I mean in general how you see the region. When you say majority here is Shia, majority there is Sunni, so you see the region in more a sectarian divide.
I think the region can live together in a peaceful situation and in a stability. We cannot find just the difference between us. We have very mutual understanding and very common ground.
Dr. Heusgen, there were also a couple of questions focused on what you said.
There was the ambassador from Pakistan who asked a question which gives me the occasion to already announce that I have to leave a bit earlier because the Pakistani Prime Minister is in town, and I have to be at the meeting. You mentioned the role of the US and question about the European Union. Let me say first that I deeply believe that the problems that we face in the region have to be resolved by the players in the region. I think that it's neither the US nor the European Union can resolve the issues for the players in the region. We can be catalysts, we can give advice, we can help, but the solution has to be found by the players in the region, number one. Number two, when it comes to the European Union, I would like to come back to what Prime Minister Mikati said a bit earlier about support or non-support given to his country. And we had your successor here in Berlin a couple of weeks ago who made the same point, and you have all the sympathy. And we know that your country is hit hardest by the crisis. We are trying to do, Prime Minister, everything we can. We have in Germany some 70,000 refugees from Syria that we host in our country. We have spent around 650 million euro for refugees, for having them in refugee camps, trying also to support them to get through the winter. But I know in comparison to what you face, this is still only a drop in the ocean. But again, this brings me to the point that it has to be resolved in the region. We can help by, as I said earlier, provide people in the governments in the region with the recipes that were successful in Europe, like to have people around the table, to have a CSCE. I think Iraq can be a showcase, and from there we can make some progress. We also, what Mr. Pertes said with regard to the 24th of November, if this is a success and Germany is part of the 3+3 talks, and we'll do everything for this to be a success. But basically, it's in the hand of Iran. Is Iran credibly giving up its nuclear program? And there is no doubt about it that Iran has violated UN resolutions, and you have to decide, are you ready now to play ball? And the compromises that have been discussed, I think, also allow you face-savingly to get out of it. So we are, diplomatically, we can do a lot, and then we can do a lot in helping you state building, rule of law, and building institutions, up to helping to have inclusive armed forces.
Dr. Heusgen, actually there's also a question coming via Twitter from a user. Dr. Heusgen, what will Germany, the EU, do to advance pressure on third parties in Russia, Iran, the Gulf, who aid atrocities in Syria and Iraq?
Well, as I said, there is no military solution to it, so we have to put political pressure on the different players, and this is what we are doing. We are telling our partners if we think that they are not up to the job in providing the support that they can use the influence that they have on the different actors. So this is, I think, what we are doing and try to do.
Prime Minister, when you hear all this now, the differences, you try to build a bridge, but is it possible to really avoid this conflict and also getting to the questions of Volker Perthes and others?
I believe what Europe and what the West in general can do is to make really pressure towards Geneva III. And today, as the foreign minister this morning said about realism, and now since we understand that Assad exists, and for the first time yesterday, when President Assad accepted what the United Nations envoy proposed about Aleppo, so it means he is recognizing for the first time that there is a counterpart in Syria. It is not himself alone. So also he was realistic yesterday by accepting. So whenever we have this realism, I hope that we will get Geneva III and we will get near towards a final settlement in Syria.
Dr. Zagar.
I'd like to go back to Volker's question. Let's hope 24th of November brings some sort of solution. What are we going to expect there? To start with, I think the Iranian demand of removing all sanctions will not be achieved, because there's 4 types of sanctions. There's the EU sanction, there is the US administration sanction, there is the Congress sanction, and there is the Security Council sanction. So all of that made it a big, difficult and complicated. What our friends in Iran hope that after the 24th, if they reach a good deal, and good deal for me means NPT plus, non-proliferation treaty plus more control, more tight, more inspection, because Iran did not say all the truth before. They have lied to the international community, so they are going to put a big pressure in terms of inspection, more frequent, IAEA involvement in that one, the atomic energy involvement, until they really certify that Iran have fully cooperated with that one. Is that going to bring a better relation to the region? No. I tell you why. Because whatever deal they are going to reach with the B5+1, the region will demand it. In other words, if they reach 20% enrichment, the region are going to demand that. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Algeria, many of those countries, when they start to have a peaceful nuclear program, are going to demand whatever agreement they have reached with the B5+1. So the international community have to watch what sort of concession they are going to give in that one. And second, I think what the concern in the region, that to use the B5+1 negotiation to give more leverage to Iran rather than the region. What are the key issues between us and Iran in the region? Why can't we develop and progress on the relation between Saudi Arabia and Iran? I think for a simple reason. First, we have to agree on the regional security architecture. Who's in charge? For us, it's just GCC country. They needed to have an external security support, which in this case, United States of America, being present there, provide the security for the state of Hormuz, where 40% of the global export in terms of energy goes out of that one, while Iran, in 2 years, 47 times have mentioned clearly they will close the Strait of Hormuz. So if you mention you want to close the Strait of Hormuz, although we understand you do not have the capacity and the capability of doing it, but still you are using it as a word and as a statement, that means we need to depend on international community to make sure that the free movement of vessels and energy through that one will be controlled. Second, using the sectarian dimension as a mean of interventionist policy for Iran, that is totally unacceptable. And without the easiness of the U.S. and unclarity of the U.S. policy, Iran would not have gone that far. You know, for instance, today, look at in Yemen. The Houthis moved all the way from Sa'ada to Sana'a. They took over, you know, the state just overnight, and yet when they release, whom do they release? The first act they did next morning, the 2 prisoners, they were arrested and sent to jail by a court decision by the Yemeni government, and they are what? They are a Lebanese Shia, Hezbollah. They hand them over to Iran. And that gives you the clear dimension and linkage that today still Iran interferes in most of the issues there. Unless they really stop that interventionist policy, and unless they try to live in peace with the region, and unless they really want to have a better economic development. You know, we have 14 oil and gas shared field with Iran.
Okay,
why can't we invest in that? Why can't we do something better for the relation between Iran and the region?
I have to interrupt you a little bit also because we have a time issue, and I know Dr. Heusgen has to leave. I'm sure Volker Perthes is probably still waiting for the answer to his second question on ISIS and Islam. If you want, I can take it up now, or you want to discuss it with the people. It seems these gentlemen don't want to answer the question. But Dr. Heusgen, now the whole deal with Geneva came up, the whole deal with Iran, and there's another country that has a huge interest, of course, in all this, which has not been mentioned, and it's Israel. And I'm wondering, what kind of deal would Europe and the US be willing to accept, also thinking about the interests of Israel?
You mean on the Iran nuclear deal?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make very briefly a point that Prime Minister Mistura made before about Geneva 3. Sure. I think at some stage we need it. I think it has to be very well prepared. It has to be a success. And I agree with you that the envoy, the Mistura, we cannot say anything at this stage. But I think with his ideas, some local freezes, I think this is something that maybe can work. So he needs our full support. But again, we can only come to a solution when the main players are agreeing and sitting around the table, and having a nuclear deal will also make Geneva 3 much easier. With regard to Israel, I think many people claim, and I think it's at least partly true, that of course a deal between Israel and Palestine would create an atmosphere, conducive atmosphere also to solutions in other places, but I don't think that it's absolutely instrumental. I think it's part of the problems in the region, but it's to a certain degree also isolated when we come to the bigger questions of the regions. With regard to the nuclear deal, Israel has been very open in also criticizing some steps or proposals, deals that were discussed and on the table. I think when it comes to the present situation, where thanks to an interim deal, we have a kind of a freeze. My impression is that the Israeli government, after criticizing it at the beginning now, is actually happy that it works. And I'm sure that if a deal can be achieved, and there are several actors around the table who look very carefully at the consequences of such a deal, I think that if a deal is reached also, I think the interest of Israel will be covered.
Okay, I see a hand up here, please. Some follow-up questions. I'll go to all of you. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, hello. My name is Dima Tarhini. I'm a senior presenter in Deutsche Welle Television Arabic Service. I'm a little bit surprised that when we are talking about the problem in the Middle East, the regional powers, especially when it comes to Syria and Iraq, none of you mentioned Turkey. And it's really very important player. And many answers to many questions is in Turkey now.
Sure. Do you have a question?
My question is about Turkey. I need an opinion about it. It will be great. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. Two more questions. I see the gentleman here and gentleman there. Yeah. So, and then we'll do another round. I promise. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Well, I cannot say I was totally surprised.
Could you introduce yourself, please, sir?
I am the Russian ambassador to the European Union. So I started saying I was not totally surprised hearing my country mentioned in this regional context. But of course, putting all responsibility for whatever happens in the world, for all the bad things that happen in the world on Russia is a bit too much. I would say it's unfair. Having said that, why don't we address in a more practical sense, why has ISIS, the ultimate incarnation of evil today, has become so strong and so effective? One of the panelists mentioned that they're getting $1 million a day from oil sales. Why don't we look, where does that oil go? Who is buying that oil? It's certainly not Russia. Secondly, why has ISIS become such a formidable military force, resembling a well-trained army? Is it not because over half of commanding officers of ISIS are former officers of Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army? The Iraqi army that was disbanded, all those professional officers left without means to survive, and they were easily recruited by ISIS.
Ambassador, excuse me, because of the shortage of time.
Yes, one final.
Question. Yes, please.
One final. Iran was criticized for having supported the Maliki government too long or too strongly. But was it not the original policy of the Western countries to support the Maliki government of the Shia Iraqi faction at the expense of the Sunnis?
And this is a question you're asking the whole panel.
Yes, sure.
Okay, please, who has a specific question to Dr. Heusgen? Because let me take this one and then go back to the panel. These two gentlemen, please, short. There is a gentleman here and then okay, maybe we have, please.
My name is Saeed Khatibzadeh. I'm from the Institute for Political and International Studies. This is a panel of many surprises, so I'm really surprised that, there is a blame game that Iran is blaming for everything.
Could you get to the question, please?
Yes, of course. So surprised, Iran is criticized for Hezbollah, which is a part of government, as in a byproduct of the Israel invasion to Lebanon in 1981. But nevertheless, I'm very concerned regarding the all the connection that Saudi Arabia has with the terrorist groups from Al-Qaeda and Taliban to the ISIS, Daesh, and Jabhat al-Nusra Islamic Front in Syria. I'm wondering, Mr. Heusgen, if the German government is ready or has started any kind of conversation or dialogue with Saudi Arabia to stop this sort of sponsoring terrorism in that region or not.
Thank you very much. And then there was another question for Dr. Heusgen here. Please, could you introduce yourself?
Washington, D.C., a country that has not come up in the discussion, Egypt. I'd be interested in the panel's comments on the direction Egypt is headed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Back to the panel. Dr. Heusgen, you would like to start because I know you have to leave.
Unfortunately, indeed, I have to leave. Both on Turkey and Egypt, it's right. One should have mentioned both countries earlier because they are important players, no doubt about it. And you may remember a couple of times I raised one way out to the crisis that we see, that we take a bit from our European experience, and this is a roundtable, this is a CSC kind of conference, this may be Geneva 3, and there we do need these players on board, and Turkey and Egypt need to be on board and need to play a constructive role. I don't want to go too much into detail of how the domestic situation and which direction they are going also in their foreign policy, but I think for all countries involved, they have to take a constructive attitude and have to come to the conclusion that to have a peaceful solution in the region is also in the benefit of themselves. With regard to Saudi Arabia, of course we have very intense, very good discussions with Saudi Arabia, and we have no indications that the Saudi government is any means supporting ISIS. We know that Saudi Arabia, of course, is an important actor and needs to be around the table, and we need its contribution. What, of course, is, and I think Mr. Pertes alluded to this earlier, when you look at ISIS ideology, when you look at Wahhabism, there are some parallels, but there are also huge differences. A Saudi Wahhabist is somebody who preaches his religion, but he doesn't call for violent action, and this is the difference between them. Briefly on Ambassador Christoph, Maliki government was supported. Yes, it was supported because the design of the Maliki government was that there was a division of labor, that they had Kurdish, Sunni, Shia representatives both as presidents, as president of the parliament and prime minister. The problem was that once they were established, then Maliki ran away with the Shiite and left the Kurds and the Sunni on either side, and didn't do what he was supposed to do. And we are now in a situation where we hope with Prime Minister al-Abadi will not commit this mistake again, but will have an inclusive, to say that the Americans were in favor of a Shiite army by Iraq. I don't want to defend our American friends here, but I know that they were very much pushing for an inclusive army, and that's what they are doing today, and this is what we also support. So thanks very much.
One last question, Dr. Heusgen, before you leave, because that was something also came up via Twitter yesterday. But is maybe also, and it goes towards the direction what the Russian ambassador said, but isn't maybe also the problem that the Western perception of what the right system should be for the Middle East or in the Middle East, maybe not the right way to always have the idea of implementing democracy or pushing for democracy or democratic system, and rather concentrate on the values and see if you are dealing with a system that at least is willing to implement Western values, but maybe not democratic. Wouldn't that be maybe a different way of looking at the region?
Well, let me make 2 points. Number one, repeat again what I said before. This has to be a regional solution. We cannot impose from Europe or from the US what kind of solutions can be found. But there are universal human rights, basic human rights, and I think this is something, the right of the individual and basic human rights, and which are tremendously violated by ISIS these days, have been violated by Assad. So I think that while leaving the system and how to organize a pluralistic society, we should leave that to the region. But we have to fight for basic human rights. These are universal rights, and these also hold true in the region. So I have to run, so thank you very much.
Before we leave, please, you mentioned about the Israelis-Palestinian issue. And I believe myself that the key for peaceful and secure Middle East is to get an agreement, a peaceful agreement, a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinian, based again on the initiative of King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, made in Beirut in 2002. And this is very important. It will be the key. And I'm sure we will have a peaceful and secure Middle East.
Dr. Heusgen, thank you very much. I know you have to run for the Pakistani Prime Minister, but the panel is not finished yet. The discussion is not. So, please go ahead. Yes, and also we had the question about Turkey.
We are looking for 24th of November. 24th of November, it will not be black and white, definitely. And today, as we are following the news from Oman, I believe we will have a kind of positive feedback that they will have an agreement in principle, but it will not be a final agreement until the Saudi Arabia and other regional countries will be involved in the final agreement. And this will give more time to really look other issues in the Middle East, starting from Bahrain to Yemen to the Gulf issue to Lebanon to Syria. This will give more time. But on the 24th, it will not be neither negative nor positive. It will be a kind of agreement in principle, a framework, as I mentioned, that it will take more time to finalize it.
Dr. Zagar.
I'd like to address maybe the question of Turkey.
Yes, please.
We welcome Turkey as a regional player, but not again using a sectarian dimension like Iran. In other words, we don't want Turkey to use the Muslim-Sunni Muslim Brotherhood as a spheres of influence, as one way of expanding their spheres of influence in the region. Second, in most of the cases, the region agree with Turkey with regard to Syria, Iraq, even Lebanon. Many of the issues we agree, the nuclear program, the whole issues, we agree with. The only big disagreement we have with them is the Muslim Brotherhood and the role that Erdogan wanted to see the Muslim Brotherhood playing on the region. So, as much as we do not welcome Iranian interventionist policy using sectarian, we don't welcome Turkish using the sectarian dimension, the Sunni side for that one. We like to see a much more constructive, General Petraeus used the word constructive engagement. We would like to see a much more constructive engagement from the Turk side on the Arab affairs, because traditionally they did not play much role in it, but lately when they saw the opportunity, they start to play a much more significant role. It's a huge border between Syria and Turkey, and I don't think the Turks have been able to control it carefully. This is why a lot of the international players on the ISIS have gone through the Turkish border or used mostly Turkish border to escape into Syria and to Iraq and to play that one. How do we see Egypt today? Again, I'll move to Egypt. Egypt required a huge economic support. I think we are very pleased to see Sisi in control, and the government today are in control, trying to control the domestic situation. They need a lot of economic support from the international community, and I hope in February meeting that we're going to see the international community real contribution for a real development in Egypt and investment in vital projects that employ a lot of locals and help Egypt in terms of their development. The last point. Is Saudi supporting terrorism? I think it's a big joke. I like that joke. And in reality, what we have to see is we have to go back and see who's really... Did Saudi fight against the terrorism? Yes. Did we come up with the initiative 10 years and the world did not want to listen and to create a center for fighting terrorism? Have we contributed $100 million to the international organization to create that center and to fund it and to support it? The last meeting was a few days ago in the United Nations, and we have seen what's the Saudi contribution. Did we put terrorist group in a list and we fought against them and we have asked the international community to cooperate? Have we created in each one of our embassies in the world a special department for counter-terrorism cooperation with that country to cooperate again? Yes, we have done it, including in Berlin. I believe we have one here. So all of that have been created and done, and the Saudi was really fighting terrorism. It's unfortunate when the other use it, like these things. It's like the new notion I start hearing nowadays that Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates are very close to Israel. That's a big joke, And I think I wanted to mention something. It is because of the Iranian policies that brought the Saudi, United Arab Emirates, and other countries, including Saudi Arabia, similar enemy. I don't think neither the Saudi or the Israeli would love to see a strong Iranian influence in Syria. because for different reasons. For us, for the Saudi, this is an external dimension from Iran interfering in internal Arab issues, and we're not going to accept it.
Dr. Zara, let me just get back to what you just said about fighting terrorism and supporting terrorism. If we look back, Prince Turki Al Faisal used to be the head of Saudi intelligence, and we do know that along with the support from other countries, Saudi was also supportive of the Taliban, and we all know what turned out.
Sorry. I was in Washington, D.C. in 1983 when Burhanuddin Rabbani was there, and the U.S. government insists to see the Saudi ambassador come out clearly and clearly stated how much we support the Mujahideen. They call it the Mujahideen at that time. For that, otherwise you didn't get the Stinger missiles. That was precondition. You come out clearly and declare how much you support the Mujahideen. You have to open the door. It was the U.S. policy supporting all Arabs fighters to go to Afghanistan. At that time, it was Brzezinski who have envisaged and the invasion of Soviet Union to Afghanistan.
Could we say that the same mistake was made with some of these groups that are fighting now in Syria? That they turned. And they were supported also by European and Western forces, but they turned now against actually the interests of the West?
Well, what we have supported, and everybody knows, is the Free Syrian Army, is the coalition that the Syrians have created, which one of the old members are here, Dr. Basma Qudumani, she can speak more in that issue. They were here. We have supported the legitimate Syrian coalition and their forces that they have created on the ground. When you wait too long to provide them the help and the support, you have created the base, البيئة السياسية الحاضنة, what we call, the right political environment to adopt people and extremism like al-Nusra and ISIS.
Yes. Are there any other questions from the audience here? I don't want to. There's a lady, she would like to ask a question, and then I have also a couple of questions for you, Excellency.
Thank you. I'm Basma Qudumani from the Arab Reform Initiative, and Dr. Sagar is alluding to me as a Syrian opposition figure as well. I accept that as well. My questions are really a comment and a question. The comment is maybe partly an answer to the question that Volker Perthes was asking earlier and that has not been addressed by the speakers. I just want to perhaps take us in the direction of what moderate and pragmatic politicians in each of your countries, whether it is in Tehran or it is in Riyadh or in any of the capitals, as well, of course, as Beirut, Mr. Prime Minister, that we have a space where some of the pragmatic people are trying to create some politics for the region. So the issue of having some continuum between crazy fanatics, conservatism, Puritan Islam, and then moderate democratic people who also belong to this religion is something that is, let us not make a judgment on it, but just say it doesn't take us anywhere.
Could you get to the question, please, because we don't have a lot of time.
Yes, I just want to say the essentialization. We do not need to answer for the crazy fanatics. We need to work in the political sphere. In that political sphere, my question goes to Mr. Moayeri. It is, where do you see Syria 5 years from now with the current politics that are happening there? Is there a way out in which your country would be able to contribute positively? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency.
I have a proposal for preventing the ISIS to be stronger. I said later, but the question Madam said, our policy for the Syrian, as the advisor to the Prime Minister of Germany said, is a political solution. There is no any fighting with the Syrian government, Syrian nations, and also interfering for the army, but even just a political solution and gathering all the groups with the Syrian to find a solution, we support them. But my proposal for preventing the ISIS, as the ambassador of Russia mentioned, it is in 3 points. First, to preventing the fund and assistance to ISIS. If the international community, the United States, the Germany, the EU, decided to prevent, they can do it. It is very important. The second thing is to help the Iraqi army and the Iraqi government with equipment, to send the equipment, as we had a negotiation with the Prime Minister of Iraq. He was in Iran last week, and he said that we paid the money to the United States to buy the equipment and armament, but they didn't deliver. We think that the Iraqi people, Iraqi army, are capable to liberate their territory. So if they help them by sending the equipment, they can continue to fight against ISIS. And the third point is the ideologically.
Okay.
Why the educated people in most of the European countries now is joining to the ISIS? It is an ideologically and a thought question. I think we are brothers in Saudi Arabia, in all over the world, Islamic world. We can sit together, the cleric people, the scholars, to find a way. We have to change the mind. If you didn't change the mind, they can gathering all the people all over the world to join the ISIS, and it will take a long time. In these 3 points that I mentioned, if we prepare and we have a program about it, I think the ISIS will not be stronger.
Now, there was a direct question. How do you see Syria?
It is very complicated. We cannot say the future after 5 years.
Okay, so it's
very complicated.
But let me get back to one thing before we go to our last round, because I cannot leave this room here without mentioning one meeting I had also, among others, in Iran, thanks to Körber-Stiftung. When you say you're not interfering in Arab countries, you know, it is a bit contradictory towards some of the things I heard in Tehran. And some of very high-level Iranian politicians were telling me that, in fact, they had and have an influence in Bahrain, for example, on the opposition. And that some years ago, when there was the question of participating in elections, Iran was reaching out to the opposition and pushed them to participate in the elections. Now, there are upcoming elections in Bahrain in a couple of weeks. And it doesn't seem that Iran is taking that action to support that process.
Influence doesn't mean that we interfere. Influence means as a cultural influence, as a literal influence, and also moral. It is completely different with interference.
And then the other question I have for you also, what we heard in Tehran when we had the meetings, that some people who are now parts of the Bahraini opposition or of human rights organizations have been trained by the Revolutionary Guards. And I'm wondering what you're saying about that. No, but we are talking about Bahrain because Bahrain came up certain times, and I'm just wondering if you could answer this.
I paid 2 formal visits to Bahrain when I was Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we had a good discussion with Bahrainis. And as you know, Iran was one of the first countries that recognized the Bahrain independent. We are not against the Bahrain government, the Bahrain people. We just support the people as a morally to have their own rights. Just it.
But, Excellency, my question was, according to some people who we spoke to in Tehran, and that was confirmed by some Western intelligence services, some people in Bahrain who are now playing roles of opposition figures have been trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Can you tell us?
I don't know the question. I don't know.
Okay.
I have to. When we talk about Turkey and Egypt, definitely Turkey and Egypt, they have a very important role in the region. And myself, I am betting on Egypt to play very important role, especially after the absence of Egypt on the foreign scene on the last 4 years, because the challenges and the economical issue, the Nile problems. But Egypt, they can play really very positive role to build up bridge between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this, it's a betting. But the main question will stay, who is going to build up the trust, the retrust, and re-confidence between United States and Russia? That's the most important, more important
That's another panel,
than
Prime
the
Minister.
others.
Dr. Zaghar? I mean, just a word to the Russian ambassador. If it wasn't the reluctant and the uncertain U.S. policy, we would not see Russia today in the region. Trust me. because Russia have said goodbye to the region. They left the region. The only relation they have is $3 billion armament sales to some of the countries there like Yemen, Algeria, and few one there. They just left the region. Russia is a producer of a raw material like us. China, they have $150 billion business with us. So I think Russia's position back to the region was due to the U.S. reluctant policies, unclarity, and so. The other 2 points I'd like to mention. One, on King Abdullah called, by the way, and Prime Minister Mikati was in Mecca. This is the last time I saw him, when Saudi Arabia have called for the dialogue of the sects. So we approved the 8th sect in Islam, which include Shia, Zaydi, Abadi, all the other one, not only the Sunni one. And second, they have called for a dialogue between the different sects in that one. So I think, Saudi have really also called for, asked for that one. We understand that extremism and hardliner, even in education system or religious issue, we need to soften it and take it, far from that area.
I think we have one more minute. Short, please, short question, short answer. You all have children, you all have families. What kind of Middle East would you like to leave behind to the next generation? Your Excellency.
Middle East we'd like to have.
To leave behind for the next generation.
Mr. Prime Minister. No, definitely what I'm looking for, democracy. As we are in Lebanon, we are a democratic country, freedom of speech, looking for the economy, for the education is the most important. Today's education is the main problem. Today we have a rate of illiteracy very high. So I'm looking for a prosperous Middle East. I'm very optimistic that we will see this soon.
We want stability and also peace in the region. But to achievement to this aim, it is very difficult because many extremist groups and thought is living in the region and we have to fight against it.
Fair and justice is very important. If people, they don't feel it's being fair and justice for them, is quite difficult. We need to see accepting the others, which mean inclusive and not excluding that one. If we have the inclusive issues where we all respect our belief, our religion, our sectarian, our ethnicity, so we have to have that sort of respect for each one of that one, so we can live together and then have a prosperous region. We live based in a good security and stability in the region.
I think there's a lot to work on. Thank you very much for this interesting discussion.